later that year, there was an exhibit at the Young Museum in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park. And the Young is like has a central tower. The building has been demolished. There's now a brand new building there. Anyway, there was this emergency exit that kind of looked like it could be an entrance to someplace. And I asked him, could I intervene on the facade? So I created this fictional museum called Tate Wikikwa Museum. And Tate Wikikwa is Leonard Peltier's given name in Lakota. Means the wind chases the sun. These were already existing, the earthquake reinforcement beams, but I painted them silver. And this was like a flat rectangle that supported the beams. And I doubled the width on this side and kept the width on the inside, so it created a forced perspective. And then I noticed there's a lot of birds. And as you might realize, birds are very special animals to native people of this continent. That's why they had feather dresses and all that. And there's a lot of pigeons in Golden Gate Park, and towards the sunset, they would always fly around. And I thought, oh man, it would be nice if they flew closer to this. So anyway, I put that on the roof, that beam. It took a few months, but they eventually started landing there. And on the inside, there was some paintings painted by Leonard, because Leonard is an artist. He painted from prison. He's now under house arrest after being in prison for 47 years, something like that. You know, I've been involved peripherally with trying to help calling attention to his situation and stuff like that. And in around that time, I think it was sometime after this exhibit, a person that was had a position in his defense committee, Ms. Aiden, she called me and she's like, "Hey, are you sitting or you're standing?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm standing. I was in Minna, 111 Minna in San Francisco. Like, I think you should sit down. I have something to tell." I was like, "What? What is it?" She goes, "Well, Leonard asks that you recommend a few people for him to make portraits of." I'm like, "What?" I was so excited. So I recommended that he do portraits of some indigenous people who would become like a head, like Evo Morales, head of state in Bolivia. And, I was at the time doing a show in Brazil that included some of Leonard's paintings, and Tony traveled to Brazil and brought the paintings. This is us in the Guarani village, showing the people to Guaranis who now live in what's called Brazil. Telling them that there's an indigenous leadership in the north that's in prison for a long time, and that he paints from prison, this kind of stories. The Evo's painting has been given to Evo. This one, so still have to, we're hoping to have Leonard's daughter and her mom meet with Rigoberto, but it hasn't happened. So that over the years, I would upgrade the drawings, just change the date, keep the same question, but a different date. Downtown San Jose, Silicon Valley, capital. I did this video projection for San Jose, California Biennial. It was an arts festival there. Got a scissor lift and an outdoors projector and projected onto the building. So it's like a light mural kind of. And I had traveled to Pine Ridge. I asked them, how do you say, land Lakota land or Oglala land? Oglala Oyate is the land of the Oglala. So one of the things we did was put the neon sign against the black night and turn the video camera on and just let it run for hours until the sunlight came on. So that was one of the things that were projected. Made some portraits of people that I spoke with, things that they said. These are some of the names of the roads in Pine Ridge, Bombing Range Road. That's for real. They have, incredible parades and, signs of pride. And this is probably of 2010. These are all, artworks that get used in ceremony, in ritual, right? Like the type of artworks we see in ethnographic museums. Hey. This is a self-portrait that Leonard painted from prison, and that I made a sculpture based on his self-portrait. I've done a couple of versions. This is the first version, and it was done in unfired clay at Syracuse University. The person standing next to the sculpture is Tom Poorbear. He's no longer with us. I did a show to Fowler. Tom came. Really beautiful person. A lot of post-genocide stress disorder. The sculpture didn't have a back. It was just built against the wall with like chicken wire, mesh, plastic tubes, whatever. It was just like, But at the opening of the show, this person, Oren Lyons, came to the opening, and Oren Lyons is like a giant in terms of like Indigenous Sovereignty Movement. In 1992, they celebrated the 500 years of Columbus coming to this continent. So the United Nations, did this whole thing. So in 1993, they're like, oops. So 1993 was International Indigenous Peoples Year. And when they announced that 1992 was going to be International Indigenous Peoples Year at the United Nations, there was indigenous leaders from all across the world that spoke. And the first one to speak was Oren Lyons in December 1992, being from the Iroquois Confederation. A lot of the United States Constitution is based on their law. So in 1992, Oren Lyons had said, our brother Leonard Peltier has been in prison too long. And he got out of prison in 2025. So Oren Lyons said, hey, what are you going to do with the sculpture after the show? And I was like, oh, shit. So we tried not to throw it away. So we had to break it to fit through the door. And Alan Jameson, he was with the New York chapter of the American Indian Movement. He had come to the show. He said, I have an organization that has an office in this former high school in Niagara Falls. So I brought the sculpture to Niagara Falls. I had to break it even in smaller pieces so it fit through one of those windows. And then with Alan's son, we reassembled the sculpture. We tried to give him, they're like, man, his hair's not all black. So I kind of messed it up, trying to give it gray hair. But that's Dennis Banks. Dennis Banks went there to see the sculpture. And then eventually it fell apart. In, I think it was 2017, maybe. For the first time, I don't know if you're familiar with Alcatraz Island in the San Francisco Bay Area, but there used to be a prison there. Then the prison was closed during the Kennedy administration. And because it was a federal prison, there's a law in this country that if something is federal property and becomes unused, then indigenous people, native people have rights to take to that land. So Alcatraz was occupied for a bit, I think 18 months, something like that. In 1969, 70, or 68, 69. So 2017, imagine how many, like half a century later, they invited for the first time the original occupiers to be welcome back. You're officially now welcome back on the island. And by then, these are like people that have been on the island as children, most of them. Tony Gonzalez was part of the American Indian Movement West. There's this working group on the rights of indigenous people because the United Nations because there's the human rights, right? There's a declaration of human rights that is very important. But they argued that in those human rights, there wasn't acknowledged the rights of the human beings that are not parts of the nations that are the United Nations, like, the Yurok don't have a seat, the Aymara don't have a seat, the Shoal, so many nations don't have a seat. So they argue that should be the right of indigenous peoples. So it's a non-binding resolution that was passed. And so Tony Gonzalez is part of the working group. They meet every year in April to go from like a non-binding resolution to like a treaty, or it's like a decades process, and they're like working on that. So one year, Tony Gonzalez asked me to join the delegation. So I got to, it was a trip to sit there at the General Assembly. Then I brought a little miniature with us, and these are a bunch of like delegates, global delegates to the working group on the rights of indigenous people. That's Tony Gonzalez there from Fresno. Mexico, way of Fresno, Vietnam, all that. And these are, so from that little model based on Leonard's self-portrait, I started making a sculpture. Because of the redwood and the power of the Klamath River tricultural region there, the Hupa, Yurak, and Karuk peoples, I asked them, would it be okay to use redwood? And they gave me permission to do that. So I did these feet. And then thought that, the feet could like have a life of their own. It was easier to move the feet than the entire sculpture. So different occasions throughout the years, the feet have gone places and people stand on them. In this case, it were folks coming back from the sunrise ceremony. In Alcatraz, they did the sunrise ceremonies. People were advocating for what's now Indigenous Peoples Day. In a lot of the United States, used to be Columbus Day. Alcatraz Island is probably the first place where that kind of advocacy was being made. When the sculpture finally got done, we assembled it at the American University in Washington, D.C., towards the end of the Obama administration. And there was, again, people were trying to get a clemency for Leonard. So we went in 2 trucks. I went with most of the sculpture on a more southern route, and Caleb Duarte, who's an Irish activist and organizer from Fresno, he went through a more northern route, and they stopped at Standing Rock. It was kind of the dead of winter. So this photo was taken in Pine Ridge, some local Lakotas. And here's Tom Poor Bear. Tom Poor Bear had moved from where he was living, and he moved close to Wounded Knee, where the Wounded Knee cemetery is. And that's his house. Like Tom was like just really living so modestly. He was the vice chairman of the Lakota tribe. So for the photo, he's holding a photograph of himself visiting Leonard in prison. He's like, "Hey, Rigo, can I put my license plate?" I'm like, "Sure." That's the only license I ever got from this society.